All right, first question for our panelists. I told the group about you, but I love hearing the story from you. So tell us about yourself, anything I missed that is like nuggets that need to be shared. And where did you start, specifically like in your career? Like where did you start? And then what is the trajectory that you've experienced that you want to share with us? Jump in.
How about Shira?
Go Shira.
Okay, the only non-product person. I guess I'll start by saying that my career has not been one line. It's been different jumps and changes, which very often careers nowadays are. So I started my career actually in the Israeli military service as a psychological assessor in the intelligence forces. There, after undergrad, I was a consultant in a consulting firm in Israel, then did MBA, then was a strategy consultant at McKinsey. And then I realized that what I really care most about is, yes, I care about growing revenues for my clients, but I care more about how the management teams get along better, and everybody would come to me for advice on that. So but almost 20 years ago, I shifted my career to be an executive coach and to help and even that career has evolved to help leaders become even better as managers and leaders. And now I work with individual executives, with leadership teams. And in the last 5 years, I started also doing angel investing and doing advising for startups. And in the past, I worked mostly with large companies when I lived in New York. Now I'm in the Bay Area, working a lot with startups all over the country and the world, and with every industry that you can think of. But with the perspective that I'd like to share today is also what leadership looks like, both in startups as well as mid-size, as well as the Fortune 500 and 100. So, which is hopefully where everyone will get to.
Cool. And this is a question that I ask all my storytelling class students to share as like a personal. So what's your favorite childhood story?
Ouch. I didn't prepare on that one.
We'll come back to you. We'll come back to
them.
All right. Who wants to go next? Go for it.
All right, I'm happy to jump in. Again, I'm Daniel Francisco. I'm currently VP of Product at ZipRecruiter. And I think one of the interesting things I'd like to share today is on a similar note, career paths, I totally agree, they're not linear. I sort of entered the product management field in a way by accident. So when I was growing up, I grew up in Canada, where I didn't have a ton of exposure to the computer industry. I didn't have a ton of exposure to the professional working world. My parents were very much blue-collar working class. So I didn't have anyone I could emulate or look at and say, hey, this is the type of technology career I can get into. What I did know is I loved math, I loved technology, I loved computer science, really got interested in that fairly early on. And so went to school to study for that. So studied computer engineering and just generally followed a really strong passion for technology and for that field. And did that without really knowing, like I assumed I'd be a computer, like an engineer somewhere essentially and writing code. And that's about all I knew about the field. But I sort of took it where it would go and followed the path here to Silicon Valley. And once I got here and started working in the field, I started to learn what I really like to do is sort of understand what problems my products are solving and really understand the impact my products can have, and sort of gradually start navigating more and more towards product management. Over the past 15 years or so, my career has been primarily within the product management field. But again, as my companies needed it, like I was at LinkedIn early and came in as a program manager, quickly realized like the most important thing I could do for the company and the most interesting thing I could do for my career was take a chief of staff role where I could help the company scale and grow. And so that took me away from product management for a couple of years. Then once I left LinkedIn, I got back into product management. So I think it's really important to consider that it's not linear. Go after the growth opportunities, go after the learning opportunities, follow some of your passions, even if they may take you a little bit away from what you consider the ideal career path. So that's sort of one of the things I'll highlight time and time again today as well.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite childhood story?
No specific story. I think I touched on it earlier. Just I grew up on a farm in Canada, so I didn't have a ton of exposure necessarily to to industry and what it would become. So, but I just followed what I got interested in early on, and it worked out for me. So yeah.
I meant like a childhood book, like Three Little Pigs.
Yeah, my memory of child it's pretty foggy, so I don't have anything specific. Like lots of great stories, great upbringing, but I don't have any stories. If I think of one, I'll definitely bring it up. But nothing jumps out. Great question though.
It's good. This has given me time to think about my favorite childhood story. So I'll have an answer for you.
Still thinking.
In a minute. But before we get there, it's interesting for me to reflect on some commonalities that I share with the panelists here that have already talked about their stuff. I guess I'll tell you the background story just briefly. I was the first generation in my family that was afforded an opportunity to go and study at a university level. But back when I went through university, the study of computer science was extremely new then, and I didn't opt for it, despite having a similar sort of childhood fascination for technology in general and kind of love for at least the few computers I was able to get my hands on for a little bit of time back when I was a child. So I went to university and I started an undergrad, Bachelor of Science, and I found that I didn't really like university very much back then. And so after a few years of both working and studying at the same time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I decided to put it on hold and go out to the workforce and see what working to live was really like. That was certainly my background. There's a little bit of a commonality with Daniel. I think we worked to live, and I did a couple of years of a lot of very odd and interesting jobs during that time. And so I have a pretty varied background in things that I've done for money over the years. Nothing untoward, by the way, all totally cool. But two things that I learned from those experiences, I think, was that I really enjoyed learning on the job much more than I enjoy learning theoretically. And I felt that I was learning things more effectively and rapidly in various fields that I'd tried in all those jobs. But also that just kind of working to be able to afford the basics of living was pretty hard. And I didn't really want to do that forever. And so at some point after, I guess it was probably about 5 years after leaving high school, with a bit of support from my then girlfriend's family at the time, we moved to the big smoke in Australia, to Sydney, which is the largest city, and it's not the capital, but it is the largest city for those of you watching who aren't from Australia. And I decided to just door knock on, the front door of IT services companies in Sydney in the mid-90s then, until I could sort of find my way into an introductory role working on something like computer maintenance or even help desk or whatever. I was pretty good at helping people with that sort of stuff. And that happened. I talked my way into a very early role at a very small IT services firm in the 90s. And in fact, it was a founding pair and then me as the first employee. And we eventually took that company to an IPO. It was not a success. And so I'm still here enjoying a career path today. But it was definitely an interesting journey, and it opened the door for everything else I've done since then, including the journey that got me into product management at some point later. I really like spending time with curious people who are lifelong learners. I think they've got lots of things to add to conversations in general, and it's probably because I've sort of been just interested in learning lots of different things in my background as well. So yeah. So childhood story. Okay, there's probably a whole batch of these, but basically when I was a bit older, I really got into the stories about the investigators. And so back when I was a kid, it was books like The Hardy Boys, this American sort of teen novel series where these slightly older boys and some of their friends were kind of like private detectives. And I always found the investigations of how they would learn things was very interesting. I also liked Tintin stories very much back at that time. I know, like, reflecting on some of the things we see in Tintin now is a bit weird, right? It's not perfect, but back at the time I really enjoyed those stories because he's just this young reporter that goes out and investigates and learns stuff around him, and the world changes, and hopefully in some way for the better as a result of that. So those are the things that I really loved as a kid.
Yeah, I love Tintin. I learned English when reading all the Tintin books, so it's great.
One of these days I'll read the French versions and try and learn a bit more French.
Funny enough, I'm trying to reach the Spanish version, and I'm using the Google Translate, the image translate on it when I get stuck. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Shira and Daniel, did you happen upon a childhood book or story that shaped you and you really liked?
I think I love Tintin as well, I think, but I really like the Famous Five, which interestingly in Hebrew, and it's a British, I think, book, Famous Five and the Famous Seven in Hebrew, it was translated the name to the Secret Five or the Secret Seven, with a secretive group of kids doing interesting, curious, mischievous things. And I had, like, when I was thinking about a story, I had, of course, so many that came up, but one interesting one is like when I was early teen, my parents and VCRs just started coming into Israel. My parents asked me one day, it's like, okay, you have a choice now. Do you want a trip to overseas this summer or to buy a VCR? Because we can't do both this year. And I was like, of course, a trip overseas. Why? Because it's learning, curiosity, meeting new people, new cultures. And I've always opted for that. So, and that was just one example of things like I completely relate with Nick about the lifelong learners and Daniel, like nothing is linear and we just follow our passions. And same thing when I was in high school, my major was like physics, math, and psychology, which was completely not related, but somehow it was related for me.
Yeah, and on my end, in terms of childhood stories, like stories I read, I was a very voracious reader. This was pre-internet, so that's how I got exposure to the world and what was going on around us. But honestly, I'm drawing a blank on specific books, but I do remember, like, I had bookshelves and bookshelves full of books, and would read them all and just consume so much content. And again, it was just as hard as it is to believe, like that's how you consume content back then. So lots of books I've read, but yeah,
In
nothing
Australia,
in particular really jumps to mind where it's like this was formative in my childhood.
I was just going to say, in Australia, those of us who probably still read books, printed on paper, call ourselves page sniffers, and it's a bit of an odd term, but there you go. I was also definitely one of those. There's something about the experience of a physical book that I love. It allows me to disconnect, but these days I find myself fairly distracted by work and all the other opportunities online. I bet you probably do too.
I still sniff pages.
Awesome. So careers are not linear. Follow your passion. Be a lifelong learner. Those are some of the themes that I'm hearing from everybody. And I love, hearing about the stories that shape you, because I feel like stories shape our values. It shapes how we see the world. It shapes the decisions we make. And kind of looking back, it's hard to do it looking forward, but certainly when you look back, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this created this and then that created this, right? So it's very interesting to see. At this point, right, if you look back, did you have expectations of where you're going to be? Were those met? Were they falling short? Do you still have expectations of where you're headed? Is it completely fluid? Like, how do you see this expectation versus meeting it topic? Because I think a lot of folks, one of the things we did a survey with 200 PMs about career stalling, right? And career stalling is, half expectation, half reality, right? Like, what were you expecting? Were you expecting to suddenly have 3 promotions in 2 years, or were you expecting a different picture? So how do you think about expectations of your own career, and then how do you extend that to people that you coach and people who report to you and your teams?
I guess I can go first. If I go all the way back to the start, right, university and what happened next, I did not have any clear expectations. And I'm going to be brutally honest, I'm not entirely sure I still do. Like everybody, I have hopes and aspirations and fears and all of that stuff. But I wasn't really clear on what sort of career path would work very well for me. I just knew that I liked learning about technology. I liked talking to people who were interested in the same problem sets. And the technology that was emerging around us offered some opportunities to engage in it. And so I would actually say that a lot of my career path has been variable and non-linear based on two factors. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I was young, and honestly, approaching 50, I'm still not sure what I want to be when I grow up. Hopefully a kid, maybe that's the right answer, right? So there was that, and I tried lots of different things along the way, and it turns out for me that was a good thing to do. Trying different roles, trying different companies, trying different experiences, working with different people was actually all very informative. A lot of things I tried, I made mistakes, or somehow, we just ended up making missteps, and those are all actually really important learnings that I think as adults at work and in our careers, we tend to not give ourselves enough permission to engage in. When we're kids, we learn plenty of stuff by making mistakes and then correcting it. And somehow, like the process of going through schooling and then, tertiary or university education, you're trying to eradicate the mistakes and become expert at your thing. And I think that a lot of the time we get into the workplace and into our careers, and we're fearful of making a mistake or showing up as if we've done the wrong thing. But actually, to me, that's right. That's how we learn what is the right next step to take, or the best next step to take, maybe not the right one, but the best next step to take. The second aspect is people who coached and advised and mentored me. There's a consistent thread of those people saying that it would be beneficial and valuable to experience different aspects of, business life in my case. And so don't spend all of your time in product management, spend some time in product marketing, spend some time in growth, spend some time maybe as the chief of staff, try lots of different stuff. I certainly worked on technical architectures of systems back in the day before I moved into product management. I think all of those experiences are actually super informative for what I do now, because in my opinion, product managers live for and live in nuance. And so, non-linear career path, but actually reflecting back on it, some good fortune to have had the right advice and some great experiences along the way that helped.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll chime in a different way. I think early on, because I didn't have exposure to sort of what the tech and like the variety of roles available and sort of how the tech industry works, and in particular, like how it works here in Silicon Valley. When I started my career, viewed the career as being something, hey, I'm generally going to spend most of my time at a single company. Turns out like I still have a lot of career to go, and I've already been at probably 7-8 companies now. I assumed it was something you climb up the career ladder and you just get more and more senior as time goes on. Turns out that's not true. You end up going between different roles and learning in different ways. But yeah, I've learned a lot. And I'd say, like, if you mapped to the expectations I had for myself when I say was going through college and about to graduate, I didn't meet those. But in other ways, I've vastly exceeded them, and that I've worked in all different functions. I've had exposure to all different types of companies, from big company to startup. I've gotten to work with some very, very interesting people. And I've sort of learned a brand new way, and I think a more fulfilling way to think about my career. It's a couple of things. So Nick mentioned the learning. So am I learning something in the role? Am I pushing myself in some way at the current moment? If I'm not, that's where I generally feel the stall or the boredom kicking in and start looking for something new. Am I working with great people I love working with and I'm learning from? I still have very good friends from early in my career because that we sort of had great experiences together. And there are people I know, even though it won't be the same company, we'll work together again. So I think that's another really super important thing, is to understand like the core set of people you want to work with. I think one other thing I'd reflect on early on is I probably, especially early in my career, didn't think enough about the role of mentors and having other people in your network who can help you think through how your career can develop and grow. I didn't realize that importance until fairly late in my career, and I think that's probably been one of the more costly, like things have turned out, but it's a lesson I think I wish I had learned much earlier in my career. So overall, yeah, I'd say it's I'm happy with where I am. I've learned a lot. I've had a great experience, but it's not how I thought about my career earlier. I mean, similar, like I'm in my 40s now, just and so right now you think I have it figured out in my career, but it's the same way. It's like my career will still have many more bounces between here and the end. And I'll roll with them. I think as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm working with great people, as long as I'm in an interesting environment, I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a fair amount of randomness and just embracing the chaos. I love that. I agree with you, Daniel, about the, career coach part. That's also something that I didn't know about. And I think if I had to go back in time and tell myself, this is one of the tips. Is there anything else that one would want to be intentional about besides the embracing the randomness? Like, are there some things that one should think about to be intentional about when you're stepping through your career? And I want to tap you, Shira, because I know you've coached a lot of folks on this.
Yes, I would agree with everything and all the takeaways about being open. As somebody who actually started my career as being very narrow and very focused and goal oriented, I remember my business school application was, I'm going to climb the corporate ladder to become I was also like you, Daniel, thought I'm going to be climbing one company like my father did many years ago, and I'm going to become CEO, climbing the marketing ladder. That was my plan. Completely different and so much more exciting and more me, what I do today. I think what I've learned early on when I was in McKinsey, one of my mentors told me in every meeting and every interaction, it's more important to build a relationship than to meet your goals. Because if you build a relationship, you can come back to the same person and then to ask for the data or to ask for the connection or to ask for whatever it is that you need to ask for. This is after I got unprompted feedback from a client who said, stop the woman. Every time she sees me in the hallway, she's asking me for more data. So that was my tuition. I always say all these dots along the line, the career path, anything that we deem as mistakes or regrets, I actually don't regret any of it. Like, I did X, then I learned from it Y, and now I'm doing like A, B, C. Like, everything, little thing that we do connects later on, whether we learn not to do it again or to do it differently. And what to be intentional about is the relationships that we're building, who we are helping, who we're bringing along, and how we collaborate. And I think that the best in investing in relationship is like it's the hockey stick, that if you spend a little bit of time investing in relationships, especially when you start in a new role, it's going to pay out big time later. And when I say relationships, one of the things that will be important, I think I might be jumping a little bit ahead, but in order to get ahead in a role, you need to think not just about your own little territory and turf, right? The product feature that you're in charge of now, or the product that you're in charge of, but think about what are your colleagues caring about. So build relationships with them, understand what they care about. So think a little bit more strategically. What does the CEO think about? What are they worried about? How does the product feature that I work on today impact the revenues tomorrow or the profitability tomorrow? So be intentional about the relationships and look to the sides and upwards, and of course care and always bring other people along, your team members, build a relationship with them when you're a manager. But again, I think I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like the week 1 lecture of my class, which is crazy because storytelling is all about stepping in the other person's shoes. It's actually much more about listening than about telling, which is crazy. And what you're saying right now is like, spend more time listening to spend less time focused on your career path and the next piece of data that you need to get to the next step. But like, what are your peers needing? What are your manager leading? Listen to them and kind of be a part of the community that you're in. So you can be a piece of that and build relationships with people. I love that. That's great advice. So how does one break from, I think a lot of folks are trying to figure out, right? You're a product manager, you know all the nuts and bolts, you're doing really great, right? In terms of shipping and writing specs and leading team, great, you scrum everything. But then you want to get to the point where now you have people that are reporting to you. Like, that particular step is hard. It's probably the hardest one. How does one break from individual contributor into management?
I would say start acting like one, not in giving direction, but in, again, worrying about what the next person needs to worry about, and start taking on some of these responsibilities. Usually the best way to get promoted is to act the role before you are given the role. But I want to hear from Nick and Daniel about the product specific.
Yeah, give us some examples about what that means, Daniel and Nick. How does one start acting in the role?
I think Shira's advice is absolutely spot on here. And it's as I'm developing people, or even how I started in management, it's sort of how I got into it. Product management, your job is, even when you get to very senior levels, leading through influence. Most of the people who you're working with and leading and sort of pushing forward to drive impact for the company and building relationships with don't report to you. But you have to do many of the same things a manager would do. And it's really understanding what their point of view is, understanding what's important to them, and driving things forward in that way. And I think every PM at every level gets to do that. But I think more specifically when it comes to managing a PM, most companies have ways of doing this where you bring in an associate product manager, and potentially like manage them or help guide them, or you mentor other product managers. You start doing a lot of the things you'd be expected to do as a manager. Like for me, the biggest thing a manager does is a manager really understands for their reports where that report wants to go in their career, and helps them get there and helps them have the appropriate impact for the company. And I think PMs can do that well before they start managing people, and they can do that also to figure out whether they like the management part of it or not. Like you get to assess, is this the type of work I want to do, and is this the type of work I want to focus on? And as a PM, you always have this mix of IC and management, so you have to learn the mix you like for yourself. And if you don't want to go into management, that's okay too. Like PMs, you can be a really senior IC PM as well. So that would be my advice there.
Is that a career path available? Like, can you be a very senior ICPM?
Absolutely. And like I've seen it happen time and time again, where at the end of the day, because we actually are, no matter whether you're an IC or a management PM, you're influencing the work of a big swath of the company. And so you can be driving significant products, having major impact for the company without managing other PMs. And some companies have really formalized PM ladders all the way up to director, senior director, even VP level, where you can be a VP equivalent PM and not manage anybody, but you're driving a huge program or a huge product for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a plus one to all of that. I think I was thinking about this question about career paths. If you don't want to ascend into management of other people, and I think that we're perhaps looking at a shift in the way people think about their work and their personal advancement in their career, and it's a healthy one. Certainly, if I think back to the start of my trajectory, I also believed a little bit, similarly to Daniel and Shira, that you would just get promoted into the next level, and careers were sort of always ever expanding. And I think at some point in my middle ages, right, I hit 40 odd, and I think I got to be okay, or fairly okay at what I was doing, but I'd realized I'd sort of peaked out. I'd kind of flattened the trajectory, and I really needed to learn new things and challenge myself in different new ways. And that doesn't necessarily always mean I'm going to now shift gears and start managing other people. I think it's absolutely crucial for great products, whatever it is, to have fantastic PMs. And that can be at a very senior level. And as company leaders and as businesses, we should be creating those career ladders and paths increasingly over time in order to make it happen. And we also need to encourage and coach and mentor people to take enjoyment from being very good at what they do, but not necessarily telling others directly what to do. Guess what? Product management, you're telling other people what to do all the time, but as Daniel pointed out, it's mostly influence without authority, right? And so that can provide lifelong opportunities for learning and making mistakes all at the same time. There's a couple of points I wanted to add on things for me that I think are sometimes practical steps to advise people when thinking about management. Firstly, if you're at the right company, you can often create an opportunity for a product manager to take a first step into this realm by working with internships. So for example, you might be able to find an opportunity to create a project that a PM can lead, in addition to their general day-to-day work, where an intern period and their guidance and direction of that intern could be part of their experience. And so that's something I always encourage people to look for the opportunity to create. I think companies ought to engage with more interns more generally and pay them for their time and their efforts, but also have good plans for people to leverage that as a stepping stone in their career and maybe experiment a little bit, with something Daniel mentioned, which is, do I like managing other people? Is that what I want to spend more time on doing? I think another thing is, back to one of Shira's points, here's a practical part on acting like, you can do the role and you want it. I think great PMs will have a clear plan or the outcome that they're seeking to deliver on their business, not just on their product, but they're starting to think all the way through to, if I do these things in the product in conjunction with those things in marketing and these other things in customer success and what have you, then this is the expected business outcome. We either retain more customers, they get happier, they upgrade faster, we advance the LTV curve for the average customer, whatever that might be. And you're starting to think through the trajectory to get to there. That's a really practical and clear thing to do as a PM in a project, is to begin delivering the vision of what you're actually going to change for the business.
Yeah, it's true. I get a lot of students who come in to the storytelling class that are right at that juncture, right, where they're ready to step in and do more of the management work. And that translates to a lot more storytelling. They've been doing the work, but they haven't been sharing it with the organization or representing the work of their team, of their engineers, of their designers, and really representing that in a way that makes sense for whoever's listening, right? Like with business metrics and all that. And being able to translate that oftentimes is the difference between someone who's heads down doing IC work versus someone who's heads up looking across and being more of a manager, right? So yeah, I love all the points that you have all shared here. Definitely +1 on everything. So you hire managers, right? You have all hired managers. What are you looking for? Like, how do you assess a candidate's people management skill? Because that's very soft. So is it in an interview setting? Is there a assignment? Is it, behavioral questions? What would you do if, like, what is the tool or tools that you use to make sure someone's a good fit as a people manager?
Shira, how about you go first?
So I ask people, both my coaching clients, when I try to help them be even better, and in hiring or in interviewing, for example, founders, what's your leadership style? And I like starting with very wide questions about everything. Because if people haven't even thought about their leadership style, that's already good. If they've never thought about the leadership style, that's probably less good. So start thinking about what it is. And I think both Daniel and Nick, you already talked about, I think you already gave us a glimpse of your leadership style, but caring about your people, their development needs, their trajectory, what they care about. That's number one. Connie, it's what you said earlier. It's about listening. It's about asking from the get-go. It's aligning expectations and saying, what do you hope to achieve? I like to ask also people, what is the thing that you do first? And what are the things that you procrastinate or do last? Because that shows what is the natural inclination of people. Like for me, whenever I have to do something that has to do with writing, it will be the last. But when I have to do something that has to do with connecting and learning and meeting new people, it will be first.
Right.
I like
answer to that question, or is it more of a fit thing? Like, are you looking for a specific answer when you ask what would you do first versus procrastinate on?
No, what I like to, so it's not a specific, it's not about fit, but it's about making sure that all the pieces of the puzzle fit. So one of the things that I do in coaching and I encourage leaders to do in hiring is to hire somebody who complements your skills as a leader. So for example, I would hire somebody who's really good at writing and who's not a procrastinator. But it's okay if they're a little less of a people person, because I can bring that to the person. And similarly, if I'm hiring 3 leaders to my team, I would make sure that there's a mix of the things that they prefer doing and are good at. Usually what you prefer doing, you're also good at, because it's doesn't mean that the things that you're procrastinating you're not that good at. You could be more well-rounded, but it's
usually is too.
You have to, but it's really about finding a fit where everybody fits together. And first and foremost, as a leader, you want somebody who cares about the people who report to them. And this is more for early leaders who are able to delegate, or at least want to learn how to, and are able to let go. So that is very hard, the transition from IC to manager. The part that's hardest to let go, especially if you are a phenomenal IC, is how to let go, because you know how to do it best. How do you let go and teach other people to do things best or even better than you?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to touch on something you said, which is the fit equation, and how now you're interviewing for a job that isn't just cut and dry, I need you to do this task list. It's much more like, how do you now interface with all the people in this group that's already there, and therefore you're an add to this, and therefore you might not be a fit. So it's not personal. It's not that you don't have the skills, but it just so happens that this is not a good place to plant this plant, is essentially
Right.
what's happening.
Right, but let me just qualify that.
yeah.
I think I'm a big believer also in job crafting. Both each and every one of us personally can craft our jobs to fit what we're best at, so that the company gets the most benefit from our skills, and with each and every one of our teams. So if I interviewed somebody and they're great, they don't fit for that role, I may be able to massage the role, slightly change it, or hire somebody else, or take that person to another team or something. If you find somebody good, you find a place for them in the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a mindset that I certainly didn't have before, that was very valuable to have gained along the way, to know that, hey, it's not personal. I used to feel like, oh, I'm rejected. I'm not offered the position of this to lead this team. But it's not really about me, right? It's really about that team needing something else. And then changing that conversation. If it's a large organization, often they have another spot that could be a good fit, right? And so shifting that conversation, and even thinking more largely, like, what are other organizations where I would be a good fit? Like learning from that conversation, saying, oh, I'm not a good fit for this type of team. So where can I, move my skills? Where can I be the exact right puzzle piece, right, for a team? I think is something that one needs to consider when interviewing for management positions. Yeah. Daniel, Nick, anything to add here on, how do you assess a candidate's people management skills? Like what kind of what are the right answers? I guess is what the group wants to hear.
Yeah, so first off, Shira, I love your "what would you do first, what would you do last" question. I'm going to add that to my repertoire. I don't ask that one, but I'm definitely going to add it. But I do think that the asking broad questions and having them be more behavioral and open-ended really works for me as well in the management setting. So similar to the "what is your leadership style," the similar question I ask is like, what's your management style, or what's your philosophy on management? Really, again, because there's so many different styles, I don't want to start asking questions that box into a particular style. I want to bring people in with all different styles who could fit in all different parts of the organization, and really hearing what they choose to focus on and what they choose to go down, I find to be very, very instructive. It lets you know what they care about as a manager, what they're going to focus on, how they're going to help grow their people. Like if that comes up, that to me is a very positive sign. But I also want the answer to be flexible. I don't want to bring in managers who manage just like me or other managers that I know and have worked with and like appreciate their style. I want to bring in that diverse set of styles. And then one of the really important things that came up is they may not be a fit for a particular role. But I think as you move up in the leadership ranks in any function, one of the really important skills to have is being on the lookout for the good of the company. And I think this is where as you move up in seniority, that's where leaders really start to separate themselves. That there's the ones who really truly are going for what's best for the business overall, and then those who are thinking more about their own vertical. And so as I'm bringing people in, I'll often try and think where I think they'd fit in the overall company. And it's not like I'm just trying to fill my role, I'm trying to make the overall company successful. And so if I get a picture on their overall style and I don't think they necessarily fit for a particular role I'm hiring for some reason, but I think they're a great person, would be a great fit in another part of the business, then I'll definitely steer them towards that. So the job crafting thing, I love that as well, and definitely practice that.
Yeah. Daniel just mentioned something that I like to think about a lot as well, especially when I'm hiring for managers of other people in our teams. And so this is probably, for me, crisply and neatly described by the leaders eat last theory, which is something that Simon Sinek wrote about. I don't slavishly follow everything that he writes and says, but he's got a lot of interesting and perceptive stuff out there. And so he's worth a look at if you want to read or listen to some books about this kind of topic. And so looking for potential managers and leaders who definitely think strategically first. And the general thesis behind Leaders Eat Last is like, my needs will happen. They'll just occur as a result of enabling everything else in front of me. And so as you learn to be a manager, this is often inverting your natural instinctive way of viewing the world at work, right? First, I need to solve for what I need to get done. And the way I'll do that eventually becomes my team gets successful and so forth. And eventually you sort of need to realize that actually for the business to succeed, you've got to solve for strategic imperatives. And I think it's also crucial for companies to make sure they have clear strategic goals for a given operating period. You know, here at Auth0 inside of Okta, we have a year-long strategic goal periods, and we tend to fairly proactively drive alignment of those things down through our organization in order to ensure that our people are practicing what that looks like to be a Leaders Eat Last kind of follower. So that's something I'll look for. Something I look for particularly with product management leaders and or managers is a manager who's focused firstly on the people. I think it's very easy to find managers who want to focus on the data, and that's good. It's a healthy practice, but I also think we need to focus on the people, and it's why I enjoy the writings of people like Simon Sinek and the things that both Daniel and Shira have said. And so those will show up in various ways, but someone who kind of exhibits throughout the conversation that desire to be successful through making their people successful. And part of it relates to like a journey I've had to go on as well. You know, letting go of being the person with the answer, the person who is the expert, who tells you what to do. Like that has been a journey that I've had to go on throughout my career, and I think I'm still on it. And it's super crucial as a manager is to start to allow people to shine and bring their answers and make their mistakes. Right, back to something we said earlier.
Yeah, lifelong journey, definitely. That's a hard thing to do, but necessary if one wants to be on that path. Do we have any questions from the group, Kanisha? That we only have 10 minutes, so I want to make sure we capture some. And if we don't, I have a great question also. So,
Okay.
Yeah. No, guys, feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, but I think you can go ahead, Connie. And
okay. Okay, so we did a career survey. 200 people responded from product management, and 70% of our survey takers were women. Okay, it was just naturally out in the world, and much more women decide to answer this. Probably because the topic was product career stalls, and they had affinity to that topic. And so maybe there's a correlation here, you know, that it's harder for female PMs to advance. We have some people write in comments in the survey, and some are talking about when they have their first baby or when they're taking their maternity leave. That's when they see a lot of challenges in coming back in, right? Have you personally observed this in your environments? Do you have any tips for women who are having a hard time with like breaking through the next stage in their career in the product world?
There's someone I really want to answer this first.
Yeah,
It was.
I have 3 children.
Let's talk about the real stuff, guys.
I have 3 children, and I did leave McKinsey when my first daughter was 1.5 years old because I came back from a long maternity leave, and my career half stalled. I chose not to travel, and I chose to be at 80%. And in the end, I realized that this is not the life that I wanted, because I would come home at 6, relieve the babysitter, put the baby to sleep, and then work again from like 8:39 until midnight. And then I chose to leave McKinsey. This is not to say, by the way, many moms can make it work at McKinsey. I'm a former workaholic, and I did not know, and I'm still working in life on setting boundaries. So this is on me. This is something that I need to learn how to do, and I'm learning how to do in terms of boundaries. But I wanted to say that in terms of career stalls, and that has served me well ever since, is creating my own career and creating my own path. And you can do it within a company, and you can do it outside of, I mean, as a portfolio of things. So what I mean is that, yes, I am independent, but I also work. Like the other day, that same daughter who's now 21 told me, it's like, Mom, you have so many jobs. You work in so many jobs. Yes, I have like, if you look at my LinkedIn, I have like 5 different jobs concurrently, and there's probably others that are not even listed there, because I created a portfolio approach. In which case, if one goes up, the other goes down, and whenever something goes down a little bit, for example, there's a pandemic in the world, I created a new line of service that started from wanting to help leaders get through the pandemic. Um, and the same thing within companies. If you're stalling, start looking around what else is needed. So if something is needed on culture, on helping with an interns program, on doing other things, I'm not saying that women specifically need to do just that, but look for other opportunities to show leadership, to get exposure to more people, and to storytell, to show people who you are and that you care. And when you do that, when you start branching and networking for the sake of helping other people and for the sake of helping the company grow, you get out of being stalled. So whenever something is stuck, I would just like look around, see who can you help, and start helping people. It always comes back. I really am a big believer in the giving karma. It always comes back to you. Staying in my territory, in my turf, and feeling bitter, unfortunately, doesn't help.
Mm. Yeah, let me add on to one thing I heard. One thing I've also observed, and by the way, I just want to preface this by stating not everyone's a parent. And so this isn't just about becoming or being a parent. But one thing I've certainly observed is that I think many women, when they embark on that part of their life where they have both a career and a family, find it difficult to balance and end up feeling guilty about either not paying enough attention to one or the other. And that's something that men in general don't have the same burden with. And so I think for me, what I like to try and do is recognize some of these factors proactively, talk about them with people, and try and find ways to make it clear that we support the women in our lives and in our work, and that not everything has to be the man's world. And I'm not sure that I'm getting it right all the time. I'm certainly not saying I'm perfect at that, but just starting to recognize some of these challenges is the first step in then beginning to address them. And so certainly on the becoming a parent side, that's perhaps a more unique thing that women would experience. But I think men should be cognizant of and kind of help work on. In general, I think it's also a truism that if I look back over my career, I've seen many more men become successful in products and leadership roles of this nature. I'm hopeful that we're starting to embark on a trajectory to a better place. And it is in part because of that recognition of some of these challenges that many of us are trying to do on a regular basis, not just that first one that I talked about, there's plenty of others. And so, there are some small practical steps that I like to take there. For me personally, I work very hard to ensure that whenever we're hiring for a product role, that we have a candidate pipeline that is proactively seeking diverse perspectives and different types of people from what we have here in Silicon Valley in particular. It's very easy to find experienced product managers that look good from a fit perspective. They've done it before. They seem to demonstrate success, but they're generally a dude, right? And it's up to us as leaders to say, great, I've got that pool of candidates. Now I need to ensure I've got a different pool from different backgrounds, and I'm working to give them opportunities. And it's not just in hiring too, it's in all of the things. So I think as leaders, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we can recognize those things and create opportunities to sponsor the groups of people who aren't as well represented.
Yeah, and I'd love to add in there, Nick, I love what you just said about like really thinking about candidate pools, thinking through every part of the process. There's 2 things I would add to that. One thing I've been doing a lot lately is really being intentional about, as interviewing people, as setting up the job requirements, as setting up like what does it take to be successful on this career ladder, what's actually needed to do the job, as opposed to what's the template I know from my past career that's tended to work. And I think like really boiling down how you interview, how you source, how you promote people, the practices you encourage in the company, really boiling them down to what is actually needed to deliver an awesome product, to deliver this impact, to grow a team, to manage a set of folks, versus what are just the questions you've used in the past that tend to, or what are the processes you've used in the past that just gravitate you towards hiring from the same pool that Nick mentioned, right? Essentially, you're going to have a team that looks like you, and that's a big failure. So I think that's one part of it. The other part is in particular, as you're getting to management, it's super important, is having those conversations with the folks on your team to really understand what they're looking to optimize for in their career, what's important to them, what's getting in their way, and don't assume it looks the same as what your answers would be. And I think that's the super, like, if you're assuming, hey, success in the PM career is moving up the ladder and like getting promoted time after time, and you just assume all your people want to do that, you're going to end up guiding them down paths that aren't best for them. Now, if they want to do that, you support them in every way you can. But if they're looking for a different path, you need to do everything you can to support them. And then I think that the last thing I'll add here is being really conscious about like setting up that work environment, setting up the cadence of the team, setting up the hours such that it works for the whole team and it's not just according to your own work style. So be very cognizant of sending those late night emails. Don't assume you shouldn't. Maybe for some people, they love working 7 to 9 p.m. But just understand what their style is and what they're looking for, and don't assume it's the same as your style. So.
Yeah, thank you for all your comments. That was great and awesome. Nick, you've always been a strong advocate for women and female leaders, and Daniel, and your comments about how to set up the environment right so that everybody can participate. I love that. We hope more leaders are like you to create great spaces for everyone to work. I wish we had more time, but we have to wrap. So it's been an awesome conversation with you, Nick, Daniel, and Shira. Really thank you for joining us here. Thank you to everybody who is listening. And if you check out Product Maestro, you'll find we have a storytelling class that we offer, and we'd love to go on a storytelling journey with you to help you build your career, build your story, and really shine in the light of your manager, employer, customer, investor, whoever it is that you are working with.